Commanders wide receiver Terry McLaurin is the most undervalued wide receiver in your Dynasty leagues. We'll explain why on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. And on today's show, we are recapping the divisional round on the NFC side. And Kate, let's start with that Lions-Commanders game. One of the highest scoring games you'll ever see in the divisional round. Washington scores 45 points. But I want to start with Terry McLaurin, who once again comes up big for us Dynasty managers. 4 catches for 87 yards and a touchdown. He's gone over at least 80 yards in both of Washington's playoff wins. He scored a touchdown in each of those games. I guess I'm curious, why is he still so undervalued in these Dynasty leagues that we play in?
I have to imagine it solely comes down to age, right? We know Dynasty managers can be a little bit fickle when it comes to the age component, when it comes to evaluating players. Now, Terry McLaurin is going to turn 30 years old here in September. So basically right at the start of the new year, we're going to get 30-year-old Terry McLaurin. But I mean, you have to admit that, like, okay, when you have a quarterback that can suddenly throw for this kind of level of efficiency in terms of like touchdown production, right? Like Jaden Daniel is not just the guy who can run. He has a level of efficiency as a passer that has allowed Terry McLaurin to crack that record for most receiving touchdowns in a season within his career. Like, we know wide receiver is a position that can age a little bit more gracefully than, let's say, running back, right? I don't think there's any other reason that you could look at Terry McLaurin and say he shouldn't be valued more highly than he is, other than age.
He is currently wide receiver 32 on Dynasty League football. 32. You look at some of the names ahead of him, and it's crazy, like Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, who's dealing with multiple concussions, Jaden Reed, DeVonta Smith, who we'll get to in a little bit, George Pickens, who's very likely to be traded this offseason. McLaurin is just in a great spot. He's the clear-cut wide receiver one on this offense with a top, I was going to say a top 10 quarterback, but that's not fair to Jaden Daniels because he's closer to top 5 than top 10. And he just continues to produce in every one of these games. At some point, I would think Dynasty managers are going to wise up because, yes, he's going to be 30 in 2025. But does his game look like it's slowing down at all to you?
It very much doesn't. And Terry McLaurin has scored a touchdown in all but one of his last 8 games. All but one.
Yeah.
And that's like, it's not even just one touchdown. Like, he scored multiple receiving touchdowns in several of those games. It's really hard not to look at Terry McLaurin. And yes, again, I know he is older, but again, this is a position in the National Football League that can age better than some. And Terry McLaurin, this is only his 6th NFL season. Came into the league a little bit older than most, 24 years old in his rookie season. But we know the floor, I think, is so safe, especially from a yardage perspective. Despite the quarterbacks he has played with, dude has never had fewer than 900 receiving yards in a single year in his career, ever.
It reminds me a little bit of Mike Evans. Like, once he got Tom Brady as his quarterback, like, he just went through a bunch of bad quarterbacks in his career. He got Tom Brady, I think, at like age 28, maybe. I have to double check. But once he got Tom Brady, the numbers were ridiculous. And then now he's got Baker, and they continue to be really good. I'm not telling you that Terry McLaurin is going to continue this for the next 5 years, but for the next 2 or 3 years, I think he can give you low end wide receiver one production. And I don't know what's going to change. Kate, I also want to mention Dyami Brown, who for the second week in a row has a really big performance. 6 catches for 98 yards against Tampa Bay last week, 5 catches for 89 yards and a touchdown. During the entire regular season, he had 308 yards and 1 touchdown. Is Dyami Brown somebody that you are buying long-term? He is going to be a free agent this offseason, but are you buying Dyami Brown as a wide receiver to Terry McLaurin?
No. But here's what I am going to say. I'm buying whoever the wide receiver 2 appears to be long-term.
Yes.
And I don't think it's going to be Dyami Brown. Insert random player here. We've seen Jaden Daniels be highly successful throwing to Terry McLaurin, obviously, but we've seen throughout the season that he's been able to support multiple receiving weapons. Zach Ertz, for crying out loud, who I thought was Cinnamon Toast Crunch. He is absolutely had a defying year for me. Never saw this one coming, but you know what? Like Zach Ertz in the back half of this season with the Commanders, like scoring lots of touchdowns, right? And like I think the takeaway here for me is not Dyami Brown. It's that there is room for multiple receiving weapons, even with the fact that running is going to be a big part of Jaden Daniels' game, which I think is just such a testament to the player and the overall trajectory this offense is on in general.
Reminds me a little bit of like when Marquez Valdes-Scantling would have some of these big playoff games, but just did nothing in the regular season. I think Dyami maybe is finally starting to become the player that we saw at North Carolina, but I mean, he's going to be 26 going into 2025, likely going to be on a new team. Maybe Washington does bring him back because they've got so much cap space, and maybe it just makes sense to keep as much of this offense together as possible. But I also don't think he's a dynamic talent. And I think Washington, if I had to guess, I think they're going to be more aggressive trying to get that wide receiver 2. I think they're going to try to get somebody that's maybe a different style from Terry McLaurin, whether that's like, hey, T. Higgins, you had a lot of success with another LSU quarterback. Why not come play for this younger LSU quarterback, and we'll give you as much money as you could ever ask for. I'm appreciative of what Dyami Brown is doing, but that's not somebody that I want to invest in long term yet.
Yeah, more of anything for me. He's a proof of concept, right?
Yeah,
like
sure.
He's a role. I think he's always just going to be a role player in the NFL. So like when I'm looking at dynasty rosters, that's not the takeaway for me. The takeaway is it always goes back to Jaden Daniels and how impressive he's been as a rookie, and the fact that I mean, this is just an ascending offense I want pieces of, and that's going to be intriguing. Let's talk about Brian Robinson Jr. here, who I think is another player that like he is a part of this ascending Commanders offense. He's playing alongside a quarterback. Like anytime you are playing with a quarterback that can run as well as Jaden Daniels and move the way that Jaden Daniels can move, it opens things up and it opens up running lanes because the defenders have to think, even for just a quarter of a second, which one of y'all has the ball again?
Yep.
Like that moment of pause can create run lanes. And I think we've seen that with Brian Robinson Jr. He's looked pretty just darn solid. I think has had a pretty safe floor in general. We're seeing a decent, I think, success trajectory. Not like the most efficient running back in the league, but year over year, we're seeing improvements in his yards per attempt average. Posted a career high 8 rushing touchdowns this season. What do we think about Brian Robinson Jr.? Never had fewer than 850 scrimmage yards in a season. Do you want to buy in or no?
To me, he's like the discount version of David Montgomery. A very good offense, can get the goal line touchdowns, but the yardage total will probably never be there. And he's not dynamic enough as a receiver to give you that PPR production. I'm looking at his receiving numbers right now, 20 catches in the regular season. He's got 65 total receptions over 3 years. But I really like him. If you want somebody with touchdown upside, on an ascending offense, I do think Brian Robinson has value, but I'm looking at him more as like a low end RB2 flex play rather than somebody that I need to go out and target this offseason.
All right, a quick this or that. Brian Robinson or Alvin Kamara?
Kamara.
Brian Robinson or DeAndre Swift?
Robinson. I think the Bears
Ramon-
draft the running back, by the way.
Robinson or Ramondre Stevenson?
Robinson.
Robinson or Zach Charbonnet?
Robinson.
Okay, so I think if we're looking at some of the names that are currently being ranked around Robinson and Dynasty ranks, that feels like a low end RB2, high end RB3.
Yeah,
probably seems about right.
Yeah, feels about right. Let's talk about the Eagles wide receivers, Kate, in this game because they did almost nothing against the Rams in the divisional round. I want to talk about their long-term value next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite moments was attending a Bills game last year. It was so much fun. The energy and the excitement is unbelievable. But now Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets to go to your favorite events with their new feature called Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Again, go check out all of the great features on Gametime, including the all-in pricing, the panoramic view. There's so many great things to love about Gametime. Go download the Gametime app today. What time is it? Gametime. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Okay, let's move over to this Rams-Eagle game because, honestly, there's not a lot of takeaways from the Lions. We know what we think of the Lions. But I want to talk about the receivers. DeVonta Smith, 4 catches for 21 yards, 0 touchdowns. A.J. Brown, 2 catches for 14 yards. Again, I know it was snowing. It started to snow more in the second half, obviously, than the first half. But A.J. Brown, through 2 playoff games, 24 total yards and no touchdowns. What's the future here for Philadelphia?
It's weird. It looks weird, Marcus. Like I'm looking at the Eagles offense and I'm thinking to myself, okay, it doesn't feel pretty. The passing game doesn't feel pretty. It is pretty when they put an emphasis on it, but here's the thing. They signed Saquon Barkley, and I don't really think they want it to look that much different than it currently looks. Would you ideally have a super bolsterous run game and passing game? Of course, but like the run game's working. So I don't necessarily know that they want to do all that much different, which makes me wonder for, some of these, hot wide receivers who want to touch the ball as often as possible and want to be impactful. I have to envision a little bit of frustration. We had already seen that boil up at certain points in the season. A.J. Brown wasn't always healthy this year, still averaged 15.8 yards per reception. He's being targeted on a pretty high percentage of routes run, 25.3% of routes run. But I still have to envision that the role he's playing is going to be a little bit of frustrating for a star wide receiver in the National Football League who wants to touch the football.
So, and I want to loop DeVonta Smith into this conversation as well. We talked about DeVonta as somebody who could fall this offseason from a dynasty perspective. And I don't think anything that we've seen in the postseason changes this. 4 catches for 21 yards in this game. Last week against Green Bay, a little bit better, 4 catches for 55 yards. But he just has not been – he's not been maybe the guy that the Eagles thought they were getting at pick 10 in the 2021 draft. Now, they did pay him, so he's under a very favorable contract. I just wonder, like, either something's going to give and one of these receivers is just going to become way better than the other from a fantasy perspective, or I think Philadelphia is going to move on from one. And I don't think it's DeVonta because his contract is so cap friendly. And I wonder if long term we do see a move. Maybe it's not this offseason, maybe it's next offseason, but I don't know if you can justify paying a quarterback $50 million a year, paying a running back as a top 2 or 3 running back in the league, paying a tight end as a top 4 tight end in the league in Dallas Goedert, and 2 receivers on massive second contracts. It feels like something's going to have to change.
Yeah, I mean, especially if that's not the style of football you're looking to play.
Yeah.
Like, if they want to be kind of a possession type of offense, then I would envision it might behoove them to be more, cap invested in the defense and
Yeah.
play more of that complementary style of football.
Which
That's
they
not to
might
say,
have
like,
to.
their
Because
defense is great. So, like, but if you're looking for where you want to make those investments, then like maybe that would make sense. This is really tricky because there's, I think, a lot of talent. They have a great offensive line. They have a great run game. They have a great quarterback who is capable of passing. Again, it just goes back to me like when I think, what are they trying to accomplish? What do they want to do? I don't really think it's to be a pass first offense. So yeah, what does that mean long term? It means I can't envision that this is going to be the situation that much. I don't know.
no, and I wonder, like, depending on how the rest of these playoff goes. Let's say they do lose to Washington in round 3, and AJ Brown has another one of these like 3 for 33 type of games. I do wonder if you're going to see him be more vocal about, hey, either I need to be more involved in this offense, or you need to trade me elsewhere. I'm not saying that he's not a team player because he seems like he is, but at some point, I think something's going to break here. And you mentioned the defense. Philadelphia's got a bunch of guys coming up as free agents this year, including Zach Bond, their all-pro linebacker, Josh Sweat, maybe their best edge rusher right now. I don't think they're going to cut or trade AJ Brown solely to try to pay those guys, but it might be some kind of decision that they do have to make down the road. So I think both these guys are unbelievable. But when I'm looking at like AJ Brown ranked close to Brian Thomas and CeeDee Lamb and Puka Nacua in our dynasty leagues, I don't love that.
I mean, yeah, it's a high price, I think, to pay. And this is one of those tricky situations for me when we look at player evaluation and like the pure talent of it all. And sometimes we get these mismatches when we're looking at situation and some of the extraneous factors that have nothing, like if we could guarantee that, AJ Brown is going to see 15 10 to 15 targets per game, right?
Yep.
Like
Yep.
he gets absolutely peppered with targets. Okay, he's probably a 1,600-yard wide receiver and nobody even close to bats an eye. Like, but he's not, that's not what he's
No.
going to get, right?
No.
So like it's about tempering what we expect the usage to be versus, what we kind of wish he might get based on what we know the talent level to be. And yeah, that's not always going to match up with our goals
Yep.
as dynasty managers, even though it sure would be nice. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot's going to depend on this playoffs, right? And I could also see a situation, Kate, where like if the Eagles were to win the Super Bowl, maybe they feel like, okay, hey, we accomplished the goal. Let's try to readjust this offense a little bit so that we can continue to be competitive for the next 5 years, right? So again, I think there's a lot up in the air with this wide receiver core for the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm curious to see what happens in the postseason.
And to be fair,
go ahead.
I do want to say, I mean, it's not like we haven't seen AJ Brown and we haven't seen passing volume here in this offense. Like, let's not forget over the past 2 seasons, including postseason, we've seen AJ Brown get 165 targets, 170 targets in his first 2 years with the Eagles. So like there's something there. It's just that I think the adjustments they made this year aren't conducive to that that long-term
Yep.
upside that we're hoping for. So just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Rams, because this is, again, another really curious offseason for the Rams, who seem like they took a step this year. But what is the future of Matt Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and the rest of that offense? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action, and that's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It is the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. And you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or just want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. I've been playing it for years now. I cannot recommend it enough. We've got a special offer for Locked On Dynasty football listeners. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is PrizePicks.com. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcast. Okay, let's talk about the Rams. This has been a weird year for the Rams because we're so used to this offense being incredible. But in this game, Kate, they scored 22 points, actually only 20 because they got a safety in this one. Against the Vikings, they scored only 20 on offense. And then to finish the year in Matt Stafford starts, 13 points against the Cardinals, 19 points against the Jets, 12 points against the 49ers. Where does this offense go from here?
It's hard to say because Matthew Stafford, as he ages, he's taken some time to consider kind of his future and what he wants. Does he want to keep playing? Like, there are a lot of question marks, and I think it's really hard to make any sort of predictions here until we know what in the world Matt Stafford is going to do. And we have an answer of, is he going to be the quarterback? How much does that impact the passing game? We know, obviously, Sean McVay, he is a wizard. We saw the Rams passing offense be very productive with Jared Goff, for instance. And, I think everybody kind of poo-pooed that production. But, I still think we all know that Matthew Stafford is going to provide a lot of upside that it might take them a minute to find anywhere else in the National Football League.
Yeah, so Matt Stafford, if he decides to come back, it would be going into year 17. And we saw Matt Stafford get beat up a lot this year. And for as fun as this team was, it just wasn't. They weren't the same high-flying offense that we were used to seeing. And I know there were injuries. I know Puka Nacua missed time. No Cooper Kupp missed time. But I do wonder, what the ceiling of this offense is going to be, even if Stafford does come back. And if he doesn't come back, what does that mean for someone like Kyren Williams? What does it mean for Puka Nacua? I already have some major concerns about Cooper Kupp because for most of Sunday's game, you didn't even notice him out there. So this is an offense to me that very much feels like it's in flux. And the only guy that I'm somewhat intrigued by is Puka, just because I think he's an awesome player. Outside of that, I have no idea what to think.
Yeah, I think it's kind of Puka or bust for me right now. Kyren Williams, another guy that obviously we've been super high on, an incredibly talented player. He was a guy that I said I'm going to be watching pretty closely here in the divisional round because of the fact that, yes, they have Blake Corum out for the season with a fracture. So he wasn't a factor in this game, never was going to be, but we've seen Kyren Williams make some mistakes this year. We've seen him put the ball on the ground far too many times. That was something I wanted to watch. And then Marcus, guess what? lost a fumble in this game that
I know.
ended
Huge
up
fumble.
being pretty critical. You have to wonder, like, holding on to the football, number one thing for a running back.
Yeah, and we should mention they took Blake Corum in the 3rd round. Now he's been dealing with a forearm injury. He was out for the rest of the postseason, but he is somebody that they invested a high pick in. Maybe that won't be a factor here in 2025 in Kyron's last year, but I do wonder. Kyron has been somebody who has really struggled with fumbles throughout his career. I do wonder if that's going to have an impact on what the Rams think of him long term. Because if, let's say, they don't give him a contract extension this offseason, and the plan is just to use him up and let him hit free agency in 2026, I just don't think anybody's going to be all that excited to go out and grab him in a non-Sean McVay offense.
Yeah, and I think, obviously Kyron Williams, the talent is there, but he's also been a huge beneficiary of the fact that Sean McVay, when he finds his guy, he commits wholeheartedly to his guy, and he has, seen the lion's share of the touches. And we know nowadays, especially, not every offensive coordinator is willing to run the workhorse route.
Yeah.
Kyron is a guy that I think, one of these physical type of guys, like he's not going to be a burner, but the physicality of a player like Kyron Williams, I think, is more conducive to having that large workload. So,
Yes.
he's going to have to find a fit. If it's not back with the LA Rams, who, again, already have question marks, he's going to have to find a situation that I think fits his play style and is going to be conducive to a voluminous role, because I think that's just the type of running back he is, and that's where he finds his greatest success. So, again, a lot of questions that kind of have me hesitant to invest in anybody not named Cooper Kupp here in this offense.
I mean, Puka Nacua, not Cooper Kupp, right?
Yeah. Oh gosh, no. Puka Nacua. Do not invest in Cooper Kupp.
No.
My God. You heard it here first.
There you go.
Don't do that.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. We will see you right back here tomorrow.